Okay. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the sixth. Yeah, this is sixth. Welcome to the sixth lecture in series on machine learning for biochemical applications. I am Devansh Pandey. I'm a second year graduate student in Narasimhan Lab. And today we are going to be talking about DNA models. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I took the slides from Dr. Jian Ma's talk on LLMs in biology at UCLA. So I took like the first half of the slides, and they also have slides on large language model for single cell data. And if you're interested in this, I've linked it here and you guys can go and check it out. So before moving forward, let's just discuss the recent history of language models. So the first ones that we have are called statistical language models. So these models use probability and statistics to model language, and most of them are based on Markov assumptions. So Markov assumptions are like really simplifying assumptions about word relationships and dependencies. They assume that like the next word in the sequence is only connected to last few words, that you can look at few words behind the current word to say something about that current word, right? And these models work on a paradigm called n-gram modeling. So there could be like 1 gram modeling, 2 gram modeling, 3 gram modeling. What does that mean is, suppose if you're doing 1 gram modeling, so to predict nth word, you are just looking at n minus first word. 2 gram modeling is like you are looking 2 words back. 3 gram, you are looking 3 words back, right? And as the number of n increases, the complexity of the model increases. You need to establish more and more dependency relationships. That makes this model very complex to work on large data, right? So these kind of statistical language models, they are limited by the model availability and the training data that we can feed into these models, because they saturate at very low levels of complexity. If you even go to like 15 grams, these models will have to do so many computations, and it is not possible with these, right? And then the second ones that came are neural language models. So these language models use deep neural nets that we have talked about a few times before in class 1, class 4, and they use these deep neural networks to model complex language properties, right? So they train networks to predict word based on previous context. And here you can increase the context to like 25, 30 words, right? And during this during this training, these learn embeddings of the words, and they actually capture semantic and syntactic relationships in the words. And you can use these on larger unlabeled text corpora. How can you use it on unlabeled text is that you give these model like, let's say 5 words in a sentence, and ask this model to predict the next 5 words. So you don't need to prepare a good labeled data set. You could just take any kind of data set that you have. You can like take all the data set from Wikipedia, put them into chunks, and ask this model to predict the next thing. And these models use neural networks like RNNs, which are called recurrent neural networks. So these are the neural network that works on sequential or text data. You could also build these models using convolutional neural networks, which were developed for images, but surprisingly, they also work very well for text. And the third one is transformer. So transformer, that is like trained on not a large amount of data set. You could call it a neural language model, right? And the ones that we would be focusing on today are pre-trained language models. So these are the language models that are trained using transformers, but they involve extensive pre-training on diverse unlabeled data set. So imagine as much data as you can gather, dump it into this model, and this model will pre-train on that. And the pre-training could be either you predict next in sequence, or you take a sequence and you mask like 15% of the words and ask this model to predict those 15% of the words, right? So what does this model do is that it creates versatile constructualized representations of the words. And the models like BERT, GPT-3, T5, these are these pre-trained large language models, and they are trained on like billions and billions of words, right? And then once these are pre-trained, you can actually fine-tune them to make this model specialize on particular downstream tasks that you want. Like suppose you have trained it on like all the Wikipedia knowledge, right? And then you can fine tune it to say, like perform a task of question answering or perform a task of text summarization, right? And or either you can use transfer learning to like use it in like some different tasks that you want. And at this moment, like these are the models that are state of art for any kind of NLP tasks. Like these models have like made the above two models obsolete. Nobody uses them now. Like whatever the task that you want to do in natural language processing, you just take a large language model and adapt it to your task. Okay, so before we move forward, I want to talk about foundation models. So these are the models that are built to replace task-specific models. So before, what used to happen in machine learning, that you have like all these different tasks, right? So for all these tasks, you will train a separate model. So for question answering, you will train a model. For sentiment analysis, you will train another. For information extraction, you need another model. But now what you could do is like, you take all these different data sets, right? Different data modalities, and you train different big language models. So like if you take text and you pre-train a GPT-2 model on that, and then you can take that GPT-2 model and fine tune it for question answering, sentiment analysis, information extraction. So you have essentially just pre-trained one big language model, and then you are just fine tuning it to do different tasks. So for all these different tasks, you don't need new models, one model that fits all, right? And if you have like image data, right, you can train it on DALL-E or any all the different other foundation models for that are built for like vision. And then you can perform image captioning. That is, you give it an image and ask the model to caption that. And suppose you give it like an image and ask it to like tell the model to identify different objects that are in that image. So essentially, you are just pre-training one single model and using it for different purposes, right? So the power of these models comes from large-scale pre-training on large unlabeled data sets. That is the only thing that model is learning that is the complex patterns in the data, and you can exploit those knowledge for different tasks that you want to do. Yeah. Right.
If something like object recognition, are you inputting image data and then decoding it to text?
Object recognition means like you could think of it in terms of like segmentation. Like you give it like an image and you segment out, like you give it an image and ask the model to just segment out all the triangles in that image. That is object. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, could it then use text to identify what it's segment? I'm just curious. I don't know.
So could you like ask her question again?
Sure. So like you have an image with like a dog.
Yeah.
Can you pass that image in and then have it, let's say a dog and a cat in a cardboard box.
Yeah.
And then have the text with detection assign labels.
That is just above one image captioning. So you can like use both of these tasks, right? And now you can also do the opposite. Like you give it the text and it will give you the image. Midjourney, yeah. Like image captioning, I think it has like really good models since like 2018, 2019. But now we also have like text to image, which is like a really difficult task as compared to image to text. Yeah. Right. So you train these on like large unlabeled data sets, then fine tune them. And how these are pre-trained, like the pre-training like the training paradigm is self-supervised learning, right? And like you can use transfer learning with these. Like a few of those are like GPT-4. That is like the base model for the chat GPT that we use. DALL-E, it is also developed by OpenAI. So in DALL-E, you could like just give the text that you want, like describe an image how you want it, and DALL-E will like give you a really good image. And then BERT, which Aaron discussed in the last lecture. So the basis of all these models is transformer. And the image that you see here is like the paper that started it all. So it came out in 2017, and it is from Google. This paper is called Attention is All You Need. And this is the first time they introduced this transformer model. And in past 6 years, it has been like cited more than 80,000 times, which is mind blowing. Yeah. So why do we need transformer? Why were like the models that were built before it, like RNNs or CNNs or LSTMs, were not giving the performance like that transformer gives? It is because for for understanding the language better, we need dynamic representation for context specific information. What does that mean? So if you like take these two examples, like the first one is I like it, and the second one is I do not like it. So the keyword here, like, should have different representations because in both of these sentences, it has opposite meanings. That is what, and by that opposite meanings, it has different context. So we want our model to understand the word based on the context of the word surrounding it. We just don't want our model to learn one simple meaning of like. We want our model to learn like what does like mean based on what is surrounding that word. So that is the power that these transformers provides. That was not very well captured in the models that came before it, right? So vanilla RNNs are like the normal RNNs. You can learn it using those RNNs, but the thing is that they are very slow and they are very sequential, and they don't have memory retention. That is, if you train it on like a 10-word sentence, it could do this, but when you do it for 100-word sentence, those will fail. It will not remember what it learned at the start of the sentence as compared to at the end of the sentence. They forget things. Then to deal with those, people build the models called LSTMs. Those are an extension of RNN, and they are called long short-term memory networks. So by that, like in RNNs, they injected gates that could tell the RNN how much information to remember and how much information to forget. So you can like work on larger context. Those could identify like what part of texts are important to remember and what are redundant that it does not need to store in its memory. But again, they were slow and sequential. What do I mean by sequential? That is, they will first go to the first word, then to the second word, then to the third word. They can't parallelize things, right? But with CNN, you could do parallelization. That is like you can run 100 different CNN on your text, right? And then concatenate all the outputs, and then you have the representation of the word. But what CNN lacks is dynamic context, that you could do it very fast with CNN, but you will not be able to distinguish between the like in first sentence versus the like in the second sentence, right? So,
RNN is recurrent.
CNN
is convolutional.
Yeah, convolutional neural. Yeah.
And I guess one quick comment or kind of question, but so the I like it versus I do not like it. In my mind, those are kind of more simple things, but I guess the secondary like embedding or the embedding would contain some information that's saying like this is used in a negative context. So
Yeah.
if we did sentiment classification, then it would probably that word would carry negative sentiment because of the surrounding context.
Yeah.
So you're saying in a different model that's only single word based, like this would not be for RNNs, right? Like single word to back would not capture that. Yeah. And I guess you could even think about like the embeddings for I like it when it's like a verb versus like as in like, you know, I'm spacing on it. Like this is like that. Like that is simile. So that's a much different have a much different embedding probably.
Yeah. So like the embeddings that these will learn would be static. That will not change based on the context that word is presented to the model.
In the previous one.
Yeah, in the previous ones, right? So what these people did, they identified like all the problems that are with existing models, and they built a model that addresses all of those. So like in order to understand the dynamic representations, first we need like dynamic computations that can do that, good memory that we can do it on large text, and third is parallelizability, that we do it fast. So transfer model does all three of these, and that's why it's like better than the models that came before it. Okay, so I just want to like discuss like 3-4 more slides about transformers. I know Aaron discussed it last time, but I think like because for me it took like reading like 15 blogs, watching 5-10 videos to actually understand it. So it is like a bit difficult. So what is this transformer architecture? So this transformer architecture is designed to handle sequential data, that it could handle text. And what other kind of sequential data do we have? We have time series. So there's this company called Bloomberg. They have trained a transformer model that is based on stock market data along with like news data. So they can make like good predictions about which stocks to buy. So it works on sequential data. So one of the key things that it does is that it captures long range dependencies. That is, you can feed it large amount of text and it will able to it will be able to identify relationships in that large text. That was not possible before. Yes.
Right. So there's no difference between a word far away and right next to the one you're giving context to. Right? We can.
What do you mean?
Right. So let's say the sentence.
Mhm.
Words.
Yeah.
The model can learn to incorporate context from the word right next to it,
And
just as equally as the word.
If that is meaningful for the model to learn, it will learn it, right? Some, like in most of the cases, it would be just beneficial to learn what is right next to the word, right? But in some cases, that word that is affecting this particular word is like either very upstream or very downstream. So this model will learn that as well, which the previous models could not. Right? And how does it do it? Like, how does it learn these dependencies and like long range dependencies between the words? It is through a mechanism called self-attention. So this self-attention mechanisms helps the model extract features for each word in the sentence in context to other words in the sentence, right? And so this model consists of like two different blocks. The one that you see here on the left, that is the encoder block, and the one that you see here on the right, that is the decoder block, right? So all of these have like a base layer. So this is called like the core of the transformer. It has like multi-headed self-attention followed by a feed-forward layer. And this particular thing is called a layer. And you repeat it n times. So you have like an n-layered network, right? So let's see what is attention. So what attention does is that it allows the model to focus on different parts of the input sequence, right? Attention will help the model realize that the word "it" here is used in context of the word "cake" in this sentence. Like, so how do you do it? So like for doing attention, you need like three different things. So first you have like input embeddings for all of your words, right? And using those input embeddings, you calculate three different things for each word in your sentence. So the first one is called query, which is the current, suppose we are talking about cake, right? So for cake, you will have an input embedding, and you will have like a query vector, you would have a key vector, and you would have a value vector. So what does the query vector mean here? So the query vector mean that the current position in input is seeking context from other position, right? You would have this query vector for cake, and it will look at the key vector for all different words in the sequence. And when you do that, this key vector that captures like which information it is important for word cake to remember or attend to. So you take a query vector, you take a key vector, you like do the dot product, and then finally, like to get the attention values, you take the value vector, which is the actual content that is associated with the positions in the input. And then when you do the dot product, you get this value that is called attention. And you do it. So if you guys remember, like Aaron talked about that, we have like multiple attention heads, right? So we do it for like every head each time. And then when we have like this output attention value from each head, we just concatenates it and then send it to the feed forward layer, right?
So, so if we were instead looking at it, wondering if it, like what it refers to in the model, would then want to figure out, oh, what does it refer to in this case? Then it would be the query, and then it would look across all the different words here, and those would be all the keys. And then it's going to compute the dot product from the query to all the keys to get essentially a distribution of which words are most relevant to it. And cake is probably going to be the most relevant word. And then from there, it's going to multiply that by all the various values. And then that is going to be the final output. So the final output is like a weighted sum, basically. Right.
It's just like, one second.
Sorry.
Yeah. So like what self-attention does is that it's a method that transformer uses to bake the understanding of other relevant words into the one that we are currently processing, right? So like here's what Clay was talking about. So let's take this example. One second, I can't see. Yeah. so the example here is that the animal didn't cross the street because it was too tight, right? So what does it in this sentence refer to? Is it referring to the street or to the animal? Like for us, it is really easy to understand, right? It is referring to an animal. But what about an algorithm? But that's like a really difficult task for an algorithm. So when when our model is processing this word it, right, self-attention allows it to associate this word it with animal as compared to associating the word it with the street, right? So as the model like processes each word, that is like each positions in the input sequence, self-attention allow it to look at other positions in the input sequence for clues that can help in better encoding that particular word, right? So if you see in the image below, I show like the attention map, right? So when we are looking at word it, you could see like those lines, like they have different, like the lines have different width, right? The more the width of the line is, that means it is paying more attention to that word, right? When you see the attention map for it, you could see like the highest value is put to like the word animal and the words next to it. But when you go to the word street, it does not put as much attention to street. That means our model is able to learn that it is associated with animal as compared to the word it being associated with the word street. Let me just like one more thing. So what Clay was asking, right? So consider we have like, it's not, these two are not connected. So consider like we have like 2-word input that's called thinking machines, right? So what do you first do? You first convert it into embeddings. How do you do it? Using your tokenizer and like concatenating your positional encodings, right? Once you have this embedding, using those, you calculate 3 different things. The first is queries, the other is keys, the third is values. Do people know like how do we calculate it? Or should I just go over? Okay, I'll just explain. So like you have this embedding vector xi, right? And then first what you do is like you initially randomize 3 different matrices. First is the weight matrix for key. The other is the weight matrix for, first is the weight matrix for queries. The other one is for keys. And the third one is for values. You randomly initialize it, but those weights are learned during your training process, right? So to calculate this Q1 vector, what you do, you take your X1 vector and you do the dot product with your weight matrix. That gives you your Q1 vector, right? For the word machine, you get similar way you get the Q2 vector, right? When you do the dot product between your weight matrix for key and X1, you get the key vector, right? And then same for Q2. And then when you take the weight matrix for values, you get the V1 vector, right? So these are all 3 different vectors for thinking, and these are all 3 different vectors for machine, right? So let's just focus on the word thinking and how attention is calculated here, right? So to remember this equation, this one, right? So what does it say? To calculate attention, we need to take the query vector and then like do the dot product with key vector, and then after we have this term, we like do the dot product with value vector, right? So that's what we are trying to do here. So we have the key vector and the query vector, we do the dot product, we get some values. So this is like key vector for thinking multiplied by query vector for thinking multiplied by key dot product with key vector for thinking, you get this value, right? And you then again take the query vector for thinking and then multiply it with key vector for machine, you get something else, right? And then what's the other thing we do? We like divide it by like the square root of the dimensions of key vector. They did it because it was to normalize it or like the stabilize the values, because like if these values are too large, our model will have to do large computations, right? So, and they also found out that when they divided by this under root of dimensionality of key vector, it helps stabilizes the gradients of the model. So that's why we do it. So here like key vector was like 60, dimensionality was 64, so they just like divide by 8. So you get these 2 values, right? And when you apply softmax, you get, so the purpose of applying softmax is to like first scale the values between 0 to 1. We want all the values to be positives. These models does not do very well with negative values. And second, we want like the sum of all the attention, like sum of all the outputs to be 1. When you apply softmax, you essentially are doing that. So instead of like 14 and 12, we have like reasonable values after applying softmax of 0.88 and 0.12, right? And when you sum those, you get like the value of 1, right? So what you can see, like, so till now, we have this value, right? But we need to like do one more dot product with the value v. So when you do that, when you do that, you will have like v1 and v2 as output, right? As you can see, like this is paying most attention to its own, but it's paying like only like a small amount of attention to word machines, right? And when you have like these two vectors, you just concatenate it to get the attention score for thinking, right? And you do this process again for machines, and you just do this process again for the third word, for the fourth word. That way you have the attention score for all the words in your sequence. Okay. Okay, so at first you randomly initialize it, and it is learned through the model. Like you will do the whole forward pass, right? You will get like a loss. If that loss does not look great, you will change these values a bit, and then again do that. And you do it as long as like your model stabilizes over loss. So at first, like they are just randomly initialized, but they are learned throughout the model, right? And yeah, sure. Yeah. No, this is pre-training. Mm-hmm.
The next kind of animal is
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. Uh, so like, so you mean like suppose it learns something about the word animal, right? And in like next input, animal comes in a very different context, right? So like the model will adjust itself to like these query vector, key value vector, and value vector, or the weight matrices that we have for them, will like adjust in such a way that it can represent all kinds of different meanings of word animal in that model. Uh-huh.
so
Mm. Mm-hmm. No, it is not. It is not.
The goal, so if it were memorizing, so the goal is that through enough diverse examples, they'll learn the general principles of the sentence structure. And then it would learn that if the actual noun was somewhere else, then that head would hopefully pay attention to wherever the noun has moved. Does that make sense?
like learning.
Mm-hmm.
Is that
Yeah, that's.
Yeah, attention is a part of the pre-training and very essential part of the
Can you
pre-training.
go back to the transformer slide? Like talk about how the attention factors into the actual like.
So you see, like here we are calculating attention, right? And then it is passed on to like a feed forward layer, right? And then it is like repeated n times. So like each different layer is learning something different about the model, and it is learning through a combination of multi-headed attention and also feed forward layer. So feed forward layer also learns something, right? And you do it multiple times on very diverse data set, and you hope to capture the general patterns in the data as compared to memorizing which things to pay attention to.
Can you describe like how this, so the embedding is being propagated through the model. Can you describe how it'll actually factor out to the output of the model, and then have that, like, how does that determine how we correct our model? So like, what is the actual output? So this attention is going through and then eventually becomes words.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so like let's first see the encoder, right? So here you have the inputs, right? You convert them into what the image that I showed you, the x1 and x2s, right? This is the x1 and x2s, and you pass it to like the attention head, right? And like you get your attention values for everything, right? And then you again like so see.
Values are Q, K,
No, yeah, Q, K, and V are used to calculate attention. This is attention value. This Z1, Z2. That's some Z1, Z2, right? So like after here, we would have like value Z1, Z2, Z3 up to Zn depending on your input sequence, right? But see, you see this, like this is the X1 getting added back to the thing again. Like here you have like the attention value Z1, Z2, Z3, but you are like adding back X1 to it, right? So what does this mean? Like you want your model to remember the actual input it was given to, plus you are giving some other things that model has learned throughout this process, right? And then you give it to just feed forward layer that will give you like a new value, which would be your original value with something added to it, right? And then so your X1 has changed to X1 plus Z here, right? And then you again repeat it n times. So you would have like a preserved original value, but with things that have been learned by the model added to it, right? So that's where your encoding part ends. Then you send those to decoder here. So what your decoder does, it does the similar thing that your encoder does, right? But at the end, it could predict the output probabilities. So suppose you give it like 5 words and you wanted the 6th word, right? So what it will do, like your 5 words would be encoded and would be given here, right? And you would have like a 6th word here. What does this mean? Like output shifted, right? So like suppose like you are giving it like 5 words, right? Your encoder will only see the first 5 words, right? But your decoder would have from the 2nd word to the 6th word. Your decoder does not see the first, like decoder, like if it's shifted, right? That means like your decoder will only have like when you input it, it would be like the first word, right? And your decoder will first predict the 2nd word based on that first word. You calculate loss because you know the actual word and what model predicted, right? Then your in the 2nd cycle, your decoder would have like the first 2 words, it will predict the 3rd word, right? And then you again calculate loss. And then over like as you like propagate through the model, you would finally have your 5 words, and your decoder will predict the actual 6th word that your model never sees, right? So throughout the training, we are hoping that like since when it's like seeing the first word and saying something about 2nd word, it will learn something. When it's seeing the first 2, predicting the 3rd one, it learns something more. It learns enough that it could predict the things that it has not seen before based on the context of the things that were given as input to it. Does that make sense?
I think too with that, it's the same exact model for pre-training and once you're done. The pre-training is taking the same model and just updating the weights that you're correctly in pre it. Then you pass whatever you want.
No. Yeah. Like like after pre-training, like you freeze the weights. You just like pass the input to get the outputs. You don't change anything. Like all the different parameters that model has learned.
Yeah, the only thing. So if you go back, there's this one more. There's this stat where you have inputs, and then you do input embedding. So you get a different embedding for word, the dictionary. Then you have positional. And then your attention is from, it doesn't matter what sequence words you put in, the attention's always just
Well, the weight.
The weights of the attention. Yeah.
The actual calculated attention.
Yeah. Like so in this here, like after you are done pre-training, right? So your weight matrices for queries, keys, and values will remain the same. But since your X1, the input is changing, you would have a different Q1, K1, V1. Right? So that's the only thing that is changing. Okay. Oh, yeah. Here, you are summing up V1 and V2. Yeah. Like suppose you had like 5 words, you would sum up V1, V2 till V5, right? And you do it for every word. So Z1 will have a different value, machines would have Z2, and then other words would have like different ones. Okay. So this transformer architecture has two different models inside it. The one is BERT, the other one is GPT. So if you just take the encoder part, that is called BERT. If you just take the decoder part, that is called GPT. So BERT, it is trained like on masked language. It is a masked language model. That means like you take the sequence, you mask like 15% of the tokens and ask the model to predict those 15% of the tokens. And it is a discriminative model. What does that mean? It is that it tries to discriminate between the input tokens that you have given it. It will try to like put the tokens in separate clusters if it can, right? And then the pre-training task is like predict masked words. Then we have GPT style. That is just the decoder part of the transformer, right? And this is autoregressive language model. What does that mean? That is, you are predicting next word. So how does it do it? At first, it will just take the first word as input. And based on that first word, it will predict the second word. Then it will take the first two words, predict the third word. So you are predicting the next word in an autoregressive way, right? And this is a generative type model. What does that mean? Because it is just seeing one thing, and based on that, it is generating a new token, right? Here, we are just predicting the token that we have masked, right? So these are the two different types. So this is masked language modeling. That is, you give it a sequence with a mask, and your model will predict what would be the most likely word there. And this is autoregressive modeling. So you give it like 4 words, it is predicting the fifth word based on those 4. Okay, so this is like the evolutionary tree for all the different large language models that we have now. And could you see the timelines? Like that was 2018, and this is 2023. And like, look at the parameters. Like it started at like GPT-1 was like 0.11 billion parameters, and GPT-4 is 1.7 trillion parameters, right? So it is just like ever growing, right? And I think most of them are like decoder only now. Yeah. But still in like biology, most of them are BERT, right? Encoder only. Yeah.
Right. The full transformer,
Mhm.
you have the 2 different.
Yeah.
Encode English.
Decode. Yeah. Like people don't usually use the full transformer architecture. Either they will use encoder based on the task that you want to do, or they will use decoder, right? But if you're doing like language translation, you use both. You put like words in English, you get words out in like German, French, whatever you want. Okay, so the topic of the day. So application of large language model in genomics. So like what is really good with these models is that you can train on large data, fine tune it to whatever task you want. But like in biology, in most of the tasks that you like most of the experiments that you perform in lab, they're either like noisy or sparse. Either you have like the data that you have is not very good, or the data that you have is not enough to train these models, right? And the other is like incomplete data. Suppose like someone working on rare diseases, they won't have enough data to like train a large language model, or like something like that are like very precious sample that you cannot destroy to get the data, right? So what you could do here is that like identify a data set that is very rich, very high quality, very diverse. In your like topic of choice, you train these large language model, and the hope is that they will help you mitigate the batch effects or the biases that are in your data that you have produced, right? Once these big models are trained, then you can just fine tune them on your data and not worry a lot about like how to like deal with biases, batch effects. They are accounted for in that big model. Okay. So now I will talk about like some recent language models in genomic that are developed for genomic sequence, by which I mean like DNA sequence, like nucleotide strings. So the first one that I think it came out in 2022 is called Big Bird. And it is trained on human reference genome. That is, you take the human reference genome, you chop it up into different strings, and you input those different strings into the model, and you perform masked language modeling. That is, you are giving like, suppose you are giving like 5mer or 6mer tokens, right? You give it 100 tokens, but 10 of those tokens are masked, and your model predict the masked token, right? And the downstream task that model was fine-tuned was to like identify whether like an input sequence that you have given to a model is a promoter or not. Like you give it a input DNA sequence, and you could ask what kind of histone modification would happen on this DNA sequence. And then came another model called DNA BERT, which could anybody tell me which model did they use? By so like it's called DNA BERT because they use BERT on DNA sequences, right? They trained different types of models. So like the input sequence was like 3-mer tokens, input sequence 4-mer tokens, 5-mer, 6-mer, and then through this, like the model parameters change. It was again trained on human reference genome, and apart from promoter prediction or chromatin profile, it could also identify where the splice sites could be, right? And then there's this other model, which is called Informer. It is developed by DeepMind. So this Informer model was trained on like CNN plus transformers. So what does that mean here? So the input was not like 100 nucleotides. The input was like 100 KB of nucleotides. So since these transformer model, they have large dependencies, but not that long dependencies. So what they first did, they took that 100 KB sequence and ran convolution over top. So that convolution could get like a condensed output that could then be passed to transformer to learn new things. And their model was able to do gene expression prediction, enhancer prioritization, identifying non-coding variants. And when you are doing gene expression prediction, you want to look at like a large sequence, right? Because like you need to look at enhancers, you need to look at promoters, your coding sequence, and also like the sequences that are downstreams. So that model performed very well. And then I think these 3 models came this year, right? Like in a span of few months. So the first one is called nucleotide transformer. They did exactly the same thing. They took like human reference genome. They took like human genomes from data called 1000 Genomes Project, which has like human genome data on like 3000 people. And they also took like DNA data from 800 different species. But they did not take any data from like plants and viruses, just like diploid genomes, right? And then they trained this transformer model on like of different parameters. And then they did like same downstream tasks, like predicting epigenetic marks, predicting whether there's a promoter or not, whether there's an enhancer or not, right? And it used like the model that I talked to you about, they used BERT, right? And it was performing well, but like after 1 or 2 months, the DNA BERT people, they released a newer version called DNA BERT 2. And they used like some neat tricks to make that model faster and make that model more efficient. So the DNA BERT was released 2021, and they again released it in 2023. So it's like a better version of DNA BERT, right? And it does like all the same tasks so all these 3 models, like they were competing with each other to show who's the best. So like all of their prediction tasks are the same. And then this one came like recently, it's called HYNA DNA. It also has the same training data, but they use a different model than transformer. They developed a new convolutional neural network model, which we won't get into the details of, right? And these all 3 models have like the similar kind of performance now, right? So let's just like talk about DNA BERT and how it is trained. So it is pre-trained on DNA sequences from human reference genome. And so how do they do it? So like they take the DNA sequence, they tokenize it, so you get your tokens, right? And then they mask like different, like 10% of the tokens, and then they feed it to the embedding layer. So now you have this like input embeddings of a token, plus you add the positional encodings. So now you get the value that I showed, X1, right? And then you pass this X1 to your model. Since it's just the encoder part, you can like take the outputs from last hidden layer and do things on it. So if you like take the first token, you could predict the things on a sentence level. Like you could predict the things for all the nucleotides in the input. But if you like take other single tokens, you could like predict things about those particular tokens or like those particular chunks of DNA. So what were the things that they did that make DNA BERT 2 much better than DNA BERT? So the first thing that they do was, instead of using a overlapping k-mer tokenization, they used byte pair encoding. So what does that mean? So in the first one, they use overlapping k-mers. So like suppose you are tokenizing in 6-mers, right? You cut a 6-mer, and then you go to the next one, you cut the 6-mer again. But what they were doing like sliding window. So they were like just moving their window two bases and then cutting again. So like token 1 and token 2 has like 4 bases that are similar to each other. So that was called like leakage problem. So what was happening? So suppose if you see there, right, over there, like if you mask here, but the half of the mask, what is in the mask was already present in the token before. So your model was not learning enough. So to do that, what they did is like non-overlapping k-mers. So they were cutting after every six base, but none of two tokens were sharing any DNA between them.
Do you know why they went for the overlapping paper in the first place?
Because like a lot of people, when they work with with DNA,
Yeah.
they used to do this overlapping thing. So maybe just like carrying that forward, but it does not work very well with transformers, right? But here, in the newer version, they introduced this thing called byte pair encoding. So instead of like cutting into 6 mer, they could like just give it 128 base, like 128 base sequence, and the model will figure out how to cut it. Like model could cut it at like 80 CG, right? Model would see like how many tumors are existing, and based on the frequency, it would set a tumor token. How many 3-mers are existing? So in that basis, it's like more optimized, and it also learns the patterns in the DNA data.
It's been established. So why?
Because like the first one came in like before byte pair encoding was invented. In DNA bird 10,000. But it's they set it to 10,000, but it's saturated at around like 8,900 or something.
What's up?
That I don't know. I have to check that. Yeah. Yeah. No, it is. Yeah. Byte pair encoding is like a tokenizer. So it tokenizes the data, and it is learned through the data. So you like before training the model, what you do is like you take your data and you train a tokenizer on it. It's not like training a neural network. Tokenizer training is like different. It does not involve any machine learning. It's just like algorithms based on like the frequency of the words, how two different nucleotides cluster together. Are they coming next to each other? Based on those and frequency, it develops tokens that it think is the most optimized way to like tokenize this data, and then it stores those in the vocabulary, right?
And in this case, 10,000 different types.
Mhm. Yeah.
Appear to be 8,000.
Mhm. Yeah, and you can also like set a minimum frequency threshold. That is, you would consider something to be a token if it appears more than X number of times. So here they set the frequency to like 5. You need to like see a token at least 5, like you need to see like a k-mer at least 5 times to consider it as a token.
I think it's clear to see.
Yeah.
This example. So,
Yeah.
and
And-
you find the most common. Then you add a 5th token of TA. Then you repeat that process.
Yeah.
Now the most common
AC.
is
Yeah. And then you move to 3-mers and you identify the most common ones, then add them. And yeah, one more thing that they do, which I thought was like really good. So instead of like using positional encoding, they use something called attention with linear biases. So what does position encoding tells your model is like the position of each token in the sentence, right? But suppose if you're like working with long sequences, how it is modeled, it is like a sinusoidal function that stores these positional encodings, which they thought was not very optimized. So they just like removed all this position encoding part. Their input embedding was similar to the token embedding. And inside their attention mechanism, like inside each head, they added like a bias term, which they think like better represents the position of the input sequences. And those bias terms are like learned through the training. So that helped their model make their model much better. So like with all of these like new innovations, their model was like much faster and more efficient than the previous models, right? And lastly, we'll just like look at some results. So like the first 4 are the DNA BERT results, and the next 4 are the nucleotide transformer results, and the last one is like DNA BERT2 results. And these are like for all different tasks. So EMP is like predicting epigenetic marks, which I think none of the models do very well, because it is like so epigenetic marks is like you are predicting about like DNA methylation, or you're predicting histone marks based on the sequence, which does not really depend on the DNA sequence. It is like an epigenetic process. So like none of the model does not work very well, right? Then the other one is like, yeah, you can say that, right? And then the other task was like identifying transcription factors in the mouse. I think the DNA BERT2 was best in it. Then there's like one more task, that COVID variant classification. You give it like virus sequences and identified which variant would be like COVID variant, right? And I think nucleotide transformer does very well, but that is like much bigger model. That is like 2.5 billion parameters model, and this one is like around 100 million parameters model. And the difference in accuracy is not that much, right? And then you predict the transcription factor in humans. Here, DNA BERT2 performs the best. And then promoter detection, that is, you give it a input DNA sequence and ask the model whether there's a promoter in the sequence or not. What? I don't know. There, I think not DNA BERT2 and nucleotide transformers.
It's training 3,000.
Yeah, 3,000 plus multi-species data set. Yeah.
So both is just
Mm-hmm.
in fact, the information they get
Mm-hmm.
what's the floater and what human somebody takes.
Mm-hmm.
It's like reading mistakes. Basically. So I wonder about the path for this kind of
Mm-hmm.
and you only hear
Uh-huh.
that's one issue here. There's just not much data.
There's a lot of data, but not useful data, I guess. Yeah, this is my last slide. Yeah, so this was like a basic primer on language models and how they are used in DNA. And if you have like any question, contact me. I'm also like just working on these things. I'm trying to develop my own language model, but using GPT. So I'm like in the process of it. Thank you.